Well, I'll start off and say that I was born here. I'll say hi, y'all. That needs to be said. And, I started my career in Wycomico County as a local planner. And then I migrated to Talbot County for a while. And then I had the benefit of coming to the state of Maryland and directing their Lower Eastern Shore, Maryland Department of Planning Regional Office. And I have been with the department now for 26 years. And as a part of that, I have assisted local government in the Lower Shore region, which for purposes of, our delineation is Talbot County down. So we have 5 counties and 28 municipalities. 25 of those municipalities exercise planning and zoning authority. So what Owen asked me to come speak to you about today was my personal experience and what I've observed over the years in the Lower Eastern Shore, specifically with respect to land use and zoning, and unfortunately, when the two are not consistent with one another. So that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. And I did get permission to use these maps, so I don't think anybody for the town of Secretary is here, but the reason I started with this slide, just as an intro slide, is to show you what a land use map looks like versus the realized zoning map by comparison. And the reason why I thought we'd start at the basics today, and not because I don't think all of you know what this looks like. Sorry, I did that wrong. But I often get questions in towns of, well, there's been a house here forever. Why can't I double the size of the house? Or why can't I rebuild here? Well, maybe there was a comprehensive rezoning done 5 years before, and the zoning of that property has changed, and guess what that house may have become? May have become a legal non-conforming use, right? So we talk about zoning and land use in terms of land use, as most of us know, is what the human use of the land is. And when we create a land use map, whether it be the existing land use or what we propose for the future in our comprehensive plans, we're showing what we think will be the pattern of land use in the broadest sense, in the broadest terms. We're only going to talk about what? Residential, commercial, industrial, institutional. And then what we do is we use those land uses to actually develop, subsequently develop our zoning. But what's important about the land use is that even though there are these broad categories, they're in the land use chapter of our comprehensive plan, which is a critical chapter of the comprehensive plan, because what does the land use do? That is the tool that we use to inform the zoning. And that is where we get the consistency between our non-regulatory document, our comprehensive plan, and our regulatory documents with our zoning ordinance, our subdivision regulations, and so forth. Another thing I wanted to bring up about the land use is a lot of people don't realize that there are state statutes that we utilize the land use plan map for certain purposes. For example, those of you that represent counties here know that when we process comprehensive water and sewer plans, what are we looking for consistency with? It's not zoning, it's land use. So if your land use plan is out of date and your growth areas aren't adequately shown, and then later you want to process a water and sewer plan amendment to extend public services into what would be your growth area as you envision it now, but you have not updated your land use, then we have an inconsistency, because we don't want to see public services going in non-growth areas, because then we're inadvertently supporting sprawl. So that's some of what we're looking at with land use, some of the things that we're thinking about, and why land use is such an important thing in your comp plan, not just existing, but proposed. Oftentimes in your proposed land use map, you're also going to incorporate your future growth areas, both at the county level and the municipal level, within the municipal growth element, because that is what dictates your future annexation areas. And we ask for consistency there as well. And so I think okay, thanks. So then we go to zoning. And now we get into the regulatory side of things. So where the comprehensive plan is just a vision and the land use is just a guide, we migrate to zoning, and we use the land use as a basis for that zoning. And now we're into a regulatory document, which is adopted by ordinance, and it goes through the regular legal process of an adoption. It regulates the type and intensity of uses that we're gonna have in our jurisdiction. It's gonna then take those land uses and further break them down into whatever type of zoning is proposed for your jurisdiction. So now your residential category, if we go with, let's be honest, what we see in most of our towns here on the Eastern Shore is we see the regular Euclidean zoning. So you then take the broad land use category of residential, we start to break it down into what we all know, R1, R2, R3, multifamily, R4. I mean, that's what we're used to seeing, right? And so Owen's asked me to be real today, so I'm gonna be real with you. That's what we see. And so that's what we look at. The other thing that's important is that when you adopt your zoning map, because it is a legal map, it is a requirement that it be posted in your municipal building with signed signatures and an adoption date. Why is that important? Because there should always only be one legal zoning map in your jurisdiction. And we've seen it happen over and over again, that as the comprehensive plan is getting updated, and then as the zoning ordinance is in draft, these various renditions of the zoning map get passed around for feedback, and then things change throughout the process. And no one seems to know what the official map is. That should always be the case, and we stress that. One of the things, recently that Maryland Department of Planning has worked on is a zoning checkup. And you can find that on our website, and it kind of takes you through your zoning ordinance and what you should be looking for to see if your zoning ordinance needs to be updated. And one of the things we stress in there is that your zoning ordinance should be signed, should be posted in town hall for everyone to see. One official map. We know that zoning, it helps to establish a community character. We know that. And that's what we try to seek to provide is character protection. You know, one of the most important things that a person invests in is their land, and zoning impacts that. So we want to be very careful as we go through that process because it can be quite, as you know, controversial. So comprehensive rezoning. Ideally, in a perfect world, when we update our comprehensive plan, we follow it with a comprehensive rezoning. The comprehensive rezoning is then based off of what we've established as our goals, our objectives, our recommendations in our comprehensive plan. In reality, on the Eastern Shore, how often do you think that happens? Very rarely, very rarely. I just did a really quick, just last night, calculation of the 30 municipalities in our region that exercise planning and zoning authority. 12 of them have not had a comprehensive rezoning in this century. In this century. We have zoning ordinances that are dated as far back as 1972. Now, does that mean there haven't been tweaks here or there? No, there have been text amendments, but we're talking about comprehensive rezoning. Probably had 3 to 4 comprehensive updates of the plan in that same period of time, but no comprehensive update to zoning. Another 8 haven't had a comprehensive rezoning in over 10 years. Just to give you some perspective, it's what we're dealing with zoning in the Lower Eastern Shore. So why doesn't it happen? That's the question. Is it because Lower Eastern Shore doesn't want good zoning? No. Is it because Lower Eastern Shore doesn't care about planning and zoning? No. Is it because they just went through a very lengthy comprehensive plan update and everybody's tired and that was controversial and that was long and that was excessive and now you have to get another group, which is probably going to be the same group that did the comprehensive plan. They are going to come into this and they're tired. They want a break, but that isn't the only reason. The main reason in our small towns, keep in mind, our small towns, most of our populations are under 5,000. None of them have planners on staff. Most of the very small towns have a town clerk, and that's about it. So they had to either find or budget money for a comprehensive plan update, probably hiring a consultant to a certain amount of money. No disrespect to consultants, Pete. But also, now they've got to hire somebody to do a comprehensive rezoning. And that's a whole nother year-long process, more than likely, where they just spent a year-long process. It's a whole nother price tag. So it's usually because they do not have local staff expertise. It's usually because it's a cost factor. Let me also add in, there's very few locations now that you can go to find grants for this type of work. We used to be able to do that quite easily. We could find grants to update comp plans. We could find grants to update zoning ordinances. It's just not out there anymore. So it's all of those reasons. And so, you know, what ends up happening in lieu of the comprehensive update is we end up with a slew of text amendments. Like we respond to every new thing that comes in that moment. And we never do a comprehensive update of the zoning code. It just doesn't happen. And then we have to be responsible for tracking those text amendments, which can become problematic as well. Same thing with comprehensive water and sewer plans, text amendments. So what happens though? In reality, what happens on the ground when we have a new comprehensive plan and we review it and everyone's finally got it to a point where we're ready to adopt it and the jurisdiction adopts the plan? It can be the best plan on planet Earth, but what changes on the ground? Nothing. Because if your zoning ordinance doesn't change, there is no means to implement your goals, objectives, and recommendations of your plan. It will be based off your previous goals and objectives, and you will not be able to do anything new that you've incorporated into your plan. It just won't be realized on the ground. So it's very, very important to follow up with the comprehensive rezoning if at all possible, because that will be the only way that you will actually realize the goals of your comprehensive plan. You know, you often hear the term, oh, that plan just sits on a shelf. And that's what they mean by that. It doesn't get used anymore. It doesn't get implemented. And what does that do? It makes people feel somewhat cheated because you have this community process, you have these people invested in the update, you had community meetings, you have this vision. And there's this expectation now that people are actually going to see things develop in a different manner, in a better way, and it's going to fulfill the vision. But that can't happen without the update of the zoning ordinance as well. The other thing that the inconsistency does is it affects some of the other reviews, like for example, annexations. When we look at annexations and when counties look at annexations, what are we comparing? We're comparing zoning to zoning. So if we have a new comp plan that shows areas for growth, but the zoning hasn't changed, then when we compare it to the county zoning, they're inconsistent. So in every case, we're asking waiver, 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 waiver. And that's what the county then has the control over the municipality of whether or not they grant that waiver. If they don't grant the waiver, then 5 years, the zoning has to remain what it is in the county. It cannot convert to the municipal zoning. So there is a control factor there and there is some power there. And that's why it behooves the municipality in particular to have an updated zoning ordinance that more coincides with what they're proposing for their growth areas, because they know their growth areas, they know what the county has zoned, and it makes sense to have those coincide. So it does affect future growth plans. It also affects priority funding area status. Because when we look at PFA status, even though it's certified locally, when it comes to the state for concurrence, we're looking to make sure it is in a designated growth area. We're looking to make sure it does allow for a density of at least 3.5 dwelling units or more per acre. So it does impact if you have a development that at some point seeks state funding, you want it to be able to have PFA status with state concurrence. That's important. And the other thing I want to talk about, I already touched on water and sewer plan amendments, but the other thing that's really important is that when you don't have an updated zoning ordinance and all of this new stuff happens in the world, right? So all of a sudden now we have cannabis and all of a sudden we have Airbnbs everywhere. That might not seem like a big deal, but in a community like Chrisfield, it's a big deal. And all of a sudden you've got people moving in and out of houses every week and parties being thrown. Airbnb regs are a big deal. And when you don't have an up-to-date code to address some of these more pressing issues, like I have listed here, you're already behind the 8 ball. You're not ahead of the game and you're reactionary and everything you're doing is reactionary. And then that becomes problematic. The other thing is spot zoning and nonconformities, big deals. We do not, it is a big no-no to rezone in response to one single property zoning request or 2 requests. In Maryland, we have change or mistake rule. Most of you are aware of it. So when you don't have an updated zoning ordinance, you get more of these requests and it becomes a problem. And let's face it, in small towns, these folks are your neighbors. When you come before the planning commission, you come before elected officials, there's a lot of pressure because they're your neighbors. They could be your relatives. They could babysat your child 10 years ago. You know, it's that kind of relationship. So it becomes really critical for you to be in a position where you don't have to face that. Before I touch on this, I just want to say a couple quick things. I talked to Councilwoman Laverne, and she's from Crisfield. And at lunch, we were talking, and she made the statement about how difficult it is to be elected official in a small town, because she never gets away from it. When she goes to the grocery store, somebody's stopping her. When she goes to the corner to get a bite to eat, somebody's stopping her. So one of the things I think a takeaway from today, if you're not from a small town, if you're not from the Lower Eastern Shore or the Eastern Shore in general, these are real challenges that folks face. And it's hard to, I want to think the right way to say this. I didn't have this plan. It is hard to get people to apply for jobs in your town. Not just the volunteer ones like Planning Commission, Board of Appeals, for the reasons I've stated, but it's also difficult to get staff to come in to take jobs that, let's face it, aren't the highest paying jobs. And they have a lot of pressure and they don't have a lot of training. And there's a big learning curve. And people don't understand the detail and the skill set needed for zoning and the implementation of zoning. It becomes very quickly becomes overwhelming. So we have towns that face real challenges of getting qualified staff, retaining staff, constant turnover. We have problems with keeping boards of appeals and planning commissions staffed. It's just a fact. And all of these things play into comprehensive plan updates, zoning ordinance updates. It's all part of this puzzle that we're trying to figure out. You know, the average person comes into town hall for a building permit. And the response is, you're in this zone, you can only do this by special exception, you're in the floodplain, you're in the critical area, and you need a setback variance. Those are the kinds of things, and somebody's sitting there like, what? You know, nobody has a clue. Those are the problems we face when we don't have zoning ordinances that are up to date. We already have enough regulations that people have to comply with. It's a disservice, really, not to be able to have our zoning ordinances updated. This was my last example. This is an actual excerpt from a comprehensive plan on the Lower Shore that was just updated last year. Very quickly, you can see they have these really high goals with respect to housing and different types of variety and type and so forth. But in reality, to your left is what the use table ended up looking like. It's just business as usual. It is the same Euclidean zoning. It is some by special exception, some with planning commission conditions of approval. The example on the right is more like what we should be striving for. Different types of zoning categories, permitted uses for different types of residential uses. Again, small town, but that's what we should be striving to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you so much for our panel. Questions from the audience?